Hello, my name is Jenny McFarland. I work for the Tucson Audubon Society. I'm the Arizona Important Bird Areas Coordinator, and this video is about how to do an Important Bird Areas survey. The multiple different types, but these are the general all-bird standard IBA surveys. So let's get started. So if you've agreed to do an Important Bird Area survey, you should have already been in contact with me or Tice Saplee up at Audubon, Arizona, and have received a copy of your protocol, your Arizona IBA Bird Survey Protocol. And this is going to be the main document that we're going to talk about today here. So it's very important that before you try to follow what we talk about in this video that you have this protocol and have already looked through it. So let's sort of go through it and discuss some of the different points and ideas behind this protocol. So quickly though, a few words about the Arizona Important Bird Areas program. This is a statewide, within Arizona, program that identifies the most important sites for bird conservation and to maintain populations of native birds. And it is a large program. So we're talking about the Arizona IBA program, but it's actually part of a larger network of programs, all within a hierarchy. So there's a United States program that is headed up by National Audubon Society, which in turn, that United States program is part of a larger program with over 170 countries participating. That's global. And the global program is headed up by BirdLife International. And there's more information about the program itself on our website, www.aziba.org, which is another place you can get this protocol if you haven't gotten it from me directly. So to do Arizona IBA surveys, first you have to have a route, a site. Now, if you're working with me or Tice or the current coordinator, you can identify a new route or take on an existing route. And the important thing about a transect, which is going to be the main survey type we're going to talk about today, is that it follows the same route, survey after survey. So it has to be an identified site. This isn't where you can just go birding anywhere and then fill out a data sheet and report it. If you do want to do that, that is great, but that would be something you would do through eBird. But to do a standardized IBA survey, you would use this protocol. So let's go through it. The beginning of the protocol just sort of talks about the goals of the program and what the IBA program is all about. It's something you can look into, and then talks about doing a workshop, an IBA bird survey workshop. That's kind of what we're doing right now. And then let's see why there's different types of surveys. So it talks about this on page 3. The main 3 types of surveys that happen in the Arizona IBA program are line transect. That's going to be the most common one. It's a one that's closest, I would say, to just sort of a normal birding day. An area search, a point count, and point count is very much standard, and we're going to talk about that. And then the last one that we don't use all that often but does sometimes happen is a census. So we'll go through each of these, but the main one we're going to talk about is a transect. So a line transect, which it begins on page 4, talking about here in the protocol. A line transect involves traversing a set route with predetermined zones of survey set distance perpendicular to the distance. So that's part of the reason we're doing this video, is that sounds kind of strange when you read it, but the concept is actually pretty easy to understand. What's going on in a transect is that you are first of all following a route that is very standard and has happened a lot, but or even if it's for the first time, then you're setting the start and end point, creating the route for the first time. That needs to be something that can be repeated. So I tend to make start and end points something that are landmarks. So like a trailhead for a start, and let's say a picnic table or a trail junction or something as an endpoint, because then they're landmarks that won't move over time, or be confusing for people if they are something like a UTM, a random UTM. So I try to make them landmarks, but that's how most of them tend to go. So the idea of a transect is that you are birding and recording what you are seeing as you move forward. That's the thing about transects. They don't have to be straight lines, but they have to be in one direction moving forward. So let's, in our example here, make our transect a creek bed. We're following a creek bed. So it's moving forward, and it is a curvy line. And that's fine. They don't have to be perfectly straight. They just have to be moving in one direction. So you're doing the transect, you're following the route, birding and recording the birds that you see. And it's also pretty important that you move at more or less a steady pace going through the route. It doesn't have to be exactly steady, but that you're making pretty consistent progress. You're not like spending all your time at the beginning and then rushing through the end type thing. You want to be making pretty steady progress going through the route. Now, the next thing it talks about in the protocol is predetermined zones. And what we mean by that is a term you'll hear a lot, which is truncation distance. And how that works is there's literally sort of, you can think of it as kind of like bands of distance along the transect. So the first one that you have to know is 0 to 50 meters. So 0 to 50 meters on either side of the transect is where birds are considered between 0 and 50 from the transect. So if you're way back here on the route and you see a bird up here perched, it's not that the bird is more than 50 meters or the distance from your point, it's the distance from the transect that's really important. So if it falls within that 0 to 50 zone, then on your data sheet you're going to mark it as being 0 to 50. So this is key for a transect. It's not that it's the distance from your position, it's the distance from the set route. So from the trail or from the creek bed or from whatever the line that is the transect that you're traveling through, that it falls within that band of 0 to 50. Now most survey routes have a cutoff limit, a truncation distance limit of 100 meters. So then you kind of think of it as two bands of distance. So a bird can be 0 to 50 or 50 to 100 if it falls within the 50 to 100 distance from the transect line. And that's important because you have to mark that on the data sheet. So if you see a bird, was it 0 to 50 or 50 to 100? Now if a bird is outside of the 100, then it's literally outside the survey. It's too far away from the transect line to be considered part of the survey, but you can still record it, and those are known as supplementals. These are birds that are supplementing sort of our knowledge of the area, but they are not within the survey zone, so they don't count, because surveying is basically a sample. You're taking a sample, in this case of a transect, a sample of space. So a set amount of space, and we want to try to document as many birds as we can detect within that set boundary. Now, what is 0 to 50 meters? That's one of those things that's really hard to do in a video, and is better to do in person, but most regular size sort of passerine small birds that you detect are going to be within 50 meters. 50 meters is pretty far. Things like hawks perched up or larger birds, you can detect up to 100 meters or further, but 50 meters is pretty darn far, and we'll see if we can do something at the end of this video that makes that more clear, what 50 meters looks like. But the main idea of a transect is that you're moving in one direction and you're recording the distance. It's almost like distance bands, categories of distance, 0 to 50, 50 to 100. In really open areas, we might even have a truncation cutoff of 150, so then you can record birds that are 0 to 50, 50 to 100, or 1 to 150 meters, which is pretty darn far. And then anything outside of that would be supplemental. But almost all the routes we do have a 100-meter truncation cutoff. So I hope that's clear. But yeah, the key thing here is that you record birds as you detect them, and that we have to determine and record on the data sheet where their distance is within bands. So it's not like you have to get the exact distance, just which band it falls in. Okay, let's go back to the protocol here. So it talks about that. Recognizable fixed boundaries, yada yada. So the timing is pretty important. So bird surveys are best in the morning, is sort of the takeaway here. Surveys should be started within 2 hours of sunrise and should be completed by late morning. So you really want to start pretty close to sunrise as you can, and you want to definitely end within 4 hours. And especially out here in the Arizona Southwest, you want to end before heat concerns, before sort of health dangers and dangers from heat definitely kick in, which is also going to really limit bird activity, as well as I'm worried about surveyor safety. And you want to know the truncation distance, what we just talked about. So another important thing is that in a transect, and indeed in almost, I think in all IBA surveys, you want to give each bird occurrence its own observation line. And what I mean by that is when you're writing the birds down on the data sheet, if you see a cardinal on the left singing, you put it down, northern cardinal, you see him, he's singing, so he's a both, audio and visual, he's a both. So a both, he's 0 to 50, you check that, you put an S in the breeding category for singing, he's a male, so you mark him as a male, and then you go a little further and you see another male cardinal on the right singing. So clearly a different bird. You can still hear that first bird back there. You're seeing another male cardinal up here. You don't change the data line to 2 cardinals. Because they're birds that are not associated with each other, they're different bird occurrences, you're going to make sure that second cardinal gets his own data line. You're going to write northern cardinal again. This one isn't singing, but he's a male, so visual, 1, male, just sitting there, and then the reason we do this is because they're birds that are not necessarily together. Now, if you see a pair of birds, you see a male and female cardinal near each other, that to you it seems like they are a pair, then you're going to put northern cardinal, visual, 2, male, female, because they're a single bird occurrence. If you see a group of white-crowned sparrows together on the ground, those birds are clearly associated with each other. They're one sort of occurrence of a bird. And you're going to put down, white-crowned sparrow, visual. You say you're not exactly sure how many because they're kind of hopping in and out of the bushes. Your best guess, though, is 15. 15, you can check the estimated box, visual, and then you can make a comment at the end, foraging on the ground. So it's not like every single white-crowned sparrow needs its own line because they're a group of birds. But if you see birds of the same species that you wouldn't think of as being in the same group, that's when they need to get their own data lines. So I hope that's clear. It's pretty important, and it's a difference of our data from eBird. So then another really important concept the protocol talks about next is the idea of a universal cover sheet. That is a cover sheet which you will see, and it's a data form that has to be filled out for every single type of survey. You're going to put the location, the date, your names, who was there, and then a signature that just verifies that the survey actually happened, your email address, the name of the route, and then the weather. So this has to happen with every single survey, and it just really helps us keep track because we have file cabinets full of paper data. We keep all this, we archive it, and it helps us keep track of exactly who was there, when it was, what happened, which is going to be very important in the future when we go and pull a data sheet because we're not sure what happened. It looks weird in the database, and that gives us very vital information. So you can't just assume that, oh, I always do this route. They know it's me, because who knows what will happen in the future. We have to get this documented every single time. So universal cover sheet, it's very important that gets filled out. And then the protocol talks basically what we all just talked about how to fill out a transect data form. Okay, and that supplementals. Supplementals are something that are worth talking about. So a supplemental is a bird that is outside of the survey time or survey location. So we talked about birds that are too far away. So that's a good example of a supplemental. Another good example is a bird that's outside of time. So you see a bird, a really good bird, as you're walking to begin the survey, but you're not quite there. The survey, but you saw a good bird before the route. You can put him down as a supplemental. You just have to make sure you check that supplemental option on the data form. And let's say the survey's over. You hit the end point and you're walking back and you see a really good bird. You can go ahead and put him down as a supplemental. So these are birds that are outside of time. So it's a sample of both distance and space through the truncation distances as well as time, the start and end time. So you have to make, birds outside of that, you can't just kind of squeeze them in no matter how good they are. You can still document them, and we do still put them in the database, but they're supplemental. Another example of a supplemental, this is especially important with a transect, is a bird that is just sort of flying over. You see a red-tailed hawk that just sort of zooms up taller. The rule of thumb that I use, if it's higher than the highest vegetation, so higher than the highest tree, and this bird just absolutely just barreled right through, just blasted through the airspace above the transect, didn't stop, wasn't really using the sample area that is the transect area, just sort of blasted right through. That bird is called a flyover, and it is considered a supplemental. So you can check it as supplemental, and then maybe in the comment put flyover. Or some of the data forms like point counts have a flyover option you can check. But a flyover is a bird that just is not using, in your opinion, is not using the transect area at all. It just zoomed right over. Now, if you have a red tail that's circling within the truncation distance up there, acting like he's hunting, he's watching the ground of the transect area for prey, that is a bird that is using the transect space. So you're going to be putting him down as a bird like you would any other bird on the survey. Swallows foraging above you, you can go ahead and put that down as a bird in using the transect space. So that bird is part of the survey. If you have birds that are doing something like flying over, foraging aerially, foraging in a tree, these are all codes that we're going to talk about in a little bit that you can document. So the more information, the better. And when you're out doing a survey, no one is ever going to have as much information about what's going on as you do in that moment. So it's really up to you to make the gut decision on whether those two birds are a pair, or whether this is a family group, or whether this is courtship behavior, or whatever. Anything that you might want to mark on a data form, describing it and then expecting someone else later who wasn't there to figure out what was going on is less helpful than just making the decision right there in the field, because no one is ever going to have as much information as you have right there. Okay, so that's really quite important. You got to go with your gut. And if later you change your mind and you want to change it, that's fine. We can change it later. If you realize, oh shoot, I just read about this and that's not what was happening, that's fine. But no one is ever going to have as much information as you have in that moment. So you really want to make sure you go ahead and mark down what you think is happening on the data sheet. Okay, so that's a real key point. So we talked about supplementals, and this goes through in very pretty strong detail exactly how each category of column in the data sheet gets filled out. So this is definitely something you want to review closely before you go out and do your first survey. The next thing the protocol talks about is a point count. And I have a little illustration here about point counts. Now point counts are a survey type that we do use sometimes in the Arizona IBA program. But the thing about point counts is that they are extremely, extremely standard. Point counts get used across all types of studies. All types of agencies use point counts, and not just for birds, for lots of things. Point counts are an absolutely standard type of survey protocol. So it's worth understanding what they are, because they come up in a lot of different studies that you might do with people. So the idea behind a point count is that you stay in one place. Okay, this is not like a transect where you're moving through time or through space. You stay in one place. You go and you find an exact point that is predetermined, that you just stand there, and then for a set amount of time, sometimes they're 5 minutes, sometimes they're 10 minutes. In the case of like the breeding bird survey, that's really big USGS study, they're 3 minutes. But whatever the time is, it's absolutely standard. And you stand on that point and you just wait. And you detect everything you can for that fixed amount of time. So this is more of a sample of time rather than space or distance. You stay in one place, and for a sample amount of set time, you record all the birds that you see and hear. And this is where hearing is really very important, because you can't kind of move around very much and try to see them. So you get to your point count, you stand on it, and you wait for that set amount of time. Now, the idea behind a point count is they still have a truncation distance, but it works almost like a radius. So you have a 50 meter, in many cases 50 or 100, but 50 meters, the example we're going to use, 50 meter truncation distance, and it is a circle going around you, because it's that distance in all directions from your point. So you are going to record birds that you see in here, standing on this point within that time frame. Now we have our pretty standard IBA protocol is 5 minutes, but we do sometimes do our 10-minute point counts, and for those you keep track of the birds that you detect from the 0 to 5 minutes, and then the birds that you detect from the 5 to 10 minutes. And we do that so that if we have to, we can eliminate that second 5 minutes to make them comparable to ones that were only 5 minutes. So it's important that if you do one of those surveys, they tend to be restoration area surveys, that you keep track of what was happening in 0 to 5 and then 5 to 10. And you want to also be very careful not to double count with point counts, because you're standing there for a fixed amount of time. If you hear a Bell's Vireo singing over here and you put it down as 0 to 50 or 50 to 100, because then you get a second band if it's a 100 meter truncation distance. You really want to kind of be keeping very close attention to what's going on, because if this Bell's Vireo seems like it moved to the other way and then you hear it singing over here, you're not going to put it down as a new bird. If you think it's the same bird, don't put it down again, no matter how much it's singing throughout the point count time. You want to put it down when you first detect it, and at the distance you first detected it, and then just sort of kind of keep track of it. But if you hear it singing and then you hear another one singing over here, but you're still hearing this first one over here, you believe it's a new bird, go ahead and put it down. Again, it's got to be a decision that you make in the field. You got to go with your gut to determine if this is the same bird or a new bird or what's going on. Now, if something happens like you first had a Bell's Vireo and then you see two together, like it's a pair, you can go ahead and upgrade on your data form. Like, oh, I first had it as an audio male singing only, but oh, I see it's a pair now. You can upgrade it to under the audio visual or both category to a both, because you both saw and heard them now. And that now it's two birds and it's a male and a female. So it's okay to up a number if it's still one bird occurrence. It's a pair, it's a family group, or they're birds that are occurring together as like a unit. But if you have a male over here and then a male over there singing, two different males, which would not really be associated with each other, you're going to go ahead and put him down as a new line, Bell's Vireo again, audio male singing. So that's pretty important. You can upgrade things as time goes on and you realize, oh, I see now it's a pair, or oh, I couldn't see him before, I had him as audio, but now I can see him, so I'll go ahead and upgrade that to a both. These are just things that give us a sense later on through time of how much you saw in terms of identifying that bird, because then if something comes up, well, that's a really rare bird, yeah, but they both saw and heard it, and then they upgraded it to a pair. I mean, that adds more insight into what was going on when you guys were doing the survey. So point counts are a measure of time, not so much moving through space, but a time at a fixed location. And then another important difference between point counts and transects is that a point count, no bird is supplemental. Any bird that enters within that column of air, going up above you, that 100 meter, the 100 meters in every direction or 50 meters in every direction, going up above you, any bird that flies through. So that red-tailed hawk that just zoomed through at a transect that we made supplemental, in a point count, as it zooms through, it counts. So go ahead and count him. And another kind of key difference, which the protocol talks about, is that if you are walking up to a point count and you flush or scare a bird from the point count location, and it flies like let's say a barn owl. You're walking to your point count and a barn owl flies out from the thick tree over the point count. You can go ahead and put that bird as your first bird of the point count, even though you hadn't started time yet, because that bird would have been there if you guys hadn't scared it. Okay, so that's a key thing with point counts too that's different from a transect or really any other type of survey. A flushed bird counts as a bird in the survey. Okay, so point counts are not, they're pretty standard, and I think they're pretty easy to understand, and the protocol also covers them in great detail. Also, again, goes through how to do a cover sheet and how to fill out every single column of a data form. The next survey type we have is on page 10, and this is right. Yeah, point count. Okay, universal. And then a census survey is one we don't use them very much. We were using them for a time in places like Prescott, but this is a waterfowl survey. So basically it's a water body, a lake or a pond, and you will find numerous vantage points. Now this is a little less constrained in terms of doing it the same way every time, because the idea is that the water body itself that you're surveying repeatedly is not moving. So people tend to find good spots with scopes or a few stationary locations around a lake or water body that they will survey from. And it talks about how to do it, but you basically find some vantage points and we'll just sort of systematically scour through the entire lake or pond and try to get a total count of what's in there. This is when you can, and the data form allows this, you can start clustering things. There's a mallard over there and there's a mallard over there. We don't assume they're just separate mallards. This is because it's water birds, you can start kind of almost like an eBird list, kind of clustering them together. Okay, we counted a total of 43 mallards. Okay, mallard 43. We had, oh look, there's two great egrets over there. We're going to count great egret too. Water birds are a little different than passerine birds, and for that we do tend to cluster them into just sort of like Christmas bird count style or eBird style, just kind of clustering birds together. So it then talks about how to do the different types of, so how to go about doing a census survey. And then on to page 12, it talks again about some information about flyovers, which we just talked about, but it's worth reading on page 12. And then page 12 then goes into nocturnal surveys. This is something we started doing more in the last few years, which are like nocturnal owl or nightjar surveys. And they're pretty important because we do tend to do them, especially if we're doing overnight survey, we'll tend to do a nocturnal survey. And we do them like point counts. Okay, they are a point count where you stay in one location and you do usually do, and it'll vary kind of on what we're doing at that specific place, but we tend to do like a minute of silence, then we'll play a target bird call. So it's a callback survey. So we'll do a target bird call, let's say elf owl, for like 15 seconds, minute of silence, play it again, minute of silence, maybe play a secondary species of interest like western screech owl for 15 seconds, minute of silence, play the western screech owl again, minute of silence. And so they tend to be about 5 to 6 minutes long, and that's about right. And they're interesting because there's no truncation distance. If you can hear it, it's in, because it's dark anyway, you can't really tell how far the birds are. And we sort of try to record what direction they're roughly coming from. And they're fun. You know, doing a nocturnal survey is kind of fun because you get birds you would not normally hear. So the protocol here on page 12 and 13 talks about how to do a nocturnal survey. And it also talks about one thing we definitely are very careful about is if you hear a great horned owl and it sounds quite close, not like a distant great horned owl, but one that seems like it's very close to the point that you're at, we don't ever play the calls of little owls because we just don't want to provoke them into giving themselves away, doing something stupid, and then getting attacked by that great horned owl, which will hunt and eat little owls. So we don't want to provoke them into doing anything silly. The survey timing and effort it talks about on page 14 of the protocol, and that's pretty important. The idea behind and let's kind of assume that who we're mostly talking about here are IBA transect surveys, or point counts, all of them. They tend to happen quarterly, roughly quarterly. Now, we also have an optional 5th survey period, but it is indeed optional. So we tend to do sort of an early spring, then kind of a late spring survey, a monsoon time survey, and then a fall migration survey, and then hopefully also a 5th, a winter survey. Now, the exact timing of these can vary based on the location or elevation of your survey area. So sometimes we want to make them much like a spring survey much later if it's a very, very high elevation survey, or sometimes much earlier if it's a desert low elevation survey. So that's something that we can work out between us, but there is some wiggle room in terms of when they happen based on what's best for that area and the target species, and then also the elevation. If some of them get missed, if you're only here part of the year and you're like, well, I can do the spring and winter survey every year, but I can't do the fall and summer, that's totally fine. It's better to get these areas surveyed even part-time rather than no time. And maybe then we can work it out where someone does part of it the other 2 times of the year or whatever. We can certainly work that out. Don't let that be a barrier to you. And then the last thing the protocol talks about on page 15 is how to do data entry. So data entry for these transects happens through our website, aziba.org, and the data all lives on a database that's here on a computer tower in the IBA office at Tucson Audubon. If you want to do your own data entry, which some volunteers do, some people enjoy doing their own data entry and can review what happened in the field as they enter it, that's great. Get with me. Here's some tips on how to do it. You're going to have to get a login and password from me, though, so get with me, and then we'll also talk about it in more depth to make sure you understand. But this sort of directions on how to do data entry is more aimed at people that have already spoken with me and know pretty much how to do it. And we can do it over the phone, but it is, and we have to follow along together on a website, because it's not as easy as eBird, because it was something that was built here before eBird. But it does work very well. It's very stable, and if you want to do it, that's great. And so this is more aimed at people who have already gone through how to do it with me but can't quite remember, how do I do supplementals? And it talks about how to do those different aspects of doing data entry. It is more common for people to not do their own data entry and just get us the forms, which is fine. I have several data entering volunteers who love doing data entry, who would be more than happy to do the data entry for you. I also have some occasional interns that I train on, who could be very helpful learning by doing data entry. So it's very common. I'd say most people don't do their own data entry and just get the data forms to us, and then we handle it. So that's great. And then all the paper data is archived in the many file cabinets you'll see if you ever visit me here in my office. The next thing I want to cover is that there are some key codes that happen a lot in a bird survey, and this form is also available on our website for download, but it is it's just like 2 pages, and it has here Some breeding behavior codes. These are absolutely standard. These are what you'll see in eBird as well as in things like the Breeding Bird Atlas. And then habitat codes, which are also pretty darn standard from the Breeding Bird Atlas. And then some general behavior codes, things like foraging aerial. That'd be like swallows foraging in the air. So some behavior that have nothing to do with breeding, just general bird behavior codes. Now what we tend to do is take these code sheets and attach them to a clipboard so that when you're out there in the field doing your data, you have your data forms here on your clipboard, you're like, oh, look at that, it's flying, it flew through the habitat. Didn't fly, not a supplemental, didn't fly above and not using it, but a bird flew through the habitat, so you'd consider it in. How do I document, what's the code for that again? And it's right here on your clipboard. And it's, in this case, we tend to put the general behavior ones on the back. And there it is, FLH, fly through habitat. So if you would like a clipboard that's already gussied up and ready to go, and you are doing a lot of sort of transect surveys for us, let me know. I'd be happy to get you a clipboard with the codes already on it. Or you can print one out and attach it to your own clipboard. It's pretty helpful to have in the field, and putting it on the clipboard and covering it in clear tape like we do. We've had some of these for years, and they've seen some rough wear, and they hold up pretty good. So that's a good way to do that. So if you'd like one, let me know. I'd be happy to get you one. But the last thing I want to talk about is bird codes. Codes themselves. The 4-letter codes, banding codes, is what they tend to be known as. These are absolutely standardized codes. And I do have on the website a multiple page document of all the different banding codes of the birds that we expect to find in Arizona. And it's always great when a new bird, a rare bird, pops up and we don't have the code for it. Now, banding 4-letter codes are one of those things where you want to be relatively careful. If you're not sure what a code is, or you want to look one up, there are some good resources now that we didn't used to have. The iBird app has banding codes in it. If you pull up any species, you'll notice in the corner there is the 4-letter code for the bird. And those are correct. They're extremely standardized by the AOS. So I have a document of the codes. Now, most codes follow, I'd say 85% of bird species follow this standardized rule, which is that if a bird has let's start with one word. If a bird has a one-word name, like a verdin, it is going to be the first 4 letters of that one-word name. So a verdin, the 4-letter code is VERD. A phainopepla, PHAI. So if it's a one-word name, it's the first 4 letters. Now most birds have 2-word names. Lesser goldfinch. So then what you do is you take the first 2 letters of each word and smash them together. So a lesser goldfinch is LE for lesser and then GO for goldfinch. So it's Lego. LEGO. Mourning dove, 2 words. First 2 letters from the first word, first 2 letters from the second word. So mourning dove is MODO, MODO. And so these really kind of standard common bird ones that you'll even hear birders just kind of say out in the field because they're so standard and so easy to remember. Those are great. Use those on a data form. Birds that have a hyphenated name, let's see, like green-winged teal. So how that works is the 2 words that are hyphenated, you take the first 1 letter from each of those hyphenated words. So for green-winged, GW, and then of that standalone word that's not hyphenated, the first 2 letters. So green-winged teal is GWTE. So those get a little harder, I think, intuitively to think of when you're out in the field. Here's the thing about codes. There's quite a bit of space on a data form to write the bird. You don't have to, it's not like only 4 letters will fit. The data form has quite a lot of space. If you are not absolutely positive about what a code is, please don't guess. If you're not sure, put in a few extra letters. If you don't know what northern cardinal is, doing NOR-CAR, the 6, doing the first 3 letters of each, is much better for whoever's doing the data entry later than trying to guess what the wrong 4 letters are trying to tell them. Because just having 4 letters, and if the code isn't right, it's very, very difficult. Now, then there are all these exceptions too, which make it kind of hard, and sometimes I think it is better just to do a more logical, longer abbreviation, or indeed write out the whole bird name. Some people do, and that's totally fine. So a good example of these weird exceptions, which are because of birds sometimes have names that don't work well for codes, is cactus wren and canyon wren. So if you do CAWR, we literally have no idea which one that is. Is it a cactus wren or was it a canyon wren? They both start with CA. So the standardized code for those birds breaks the rule, because it has to, and so canyon wren is CANW and cactus wren is CACW, breaking the standard pattern, but it has to because the bird names just don't work with the code. So adding a few more letters, if you're not absolutely positive what the code is, adding a few more letters can be extremely, extremely helpful and make it a lot easier for whoever's doing the data entry later and help us make sure we don't put in a bird incorrectly. If it's a bird that comes up a lot and you want to know for sure what the code is, and this for the sake of time, you can find it on the list, or you can find it in the iBird app, or you can even find them online too. So I think this is great that you want to do a transect survey. Thank you so much. And again, sort of the key thing I really try to impress on people is that you got to make that decision in the field. If you're not sure what it is, or you're not sure what it's doing or how to record it, you gotta have to if you're with a partner, you and your team have to make a decision right there in the field. If you think you have an interesting bird and you happen to have a camera, go ahead and take a photo, and we can talk about it later, but maybe just write a note and have a unknown bird written in the data form, and then a comment, photo taken, and we can change that later. That's totally fine, but you have to, with the information you have there in the field, no one's ever going to have more information than you. We are moving here at the Arizona IBA program to make our entire database ready to be uploaded into eBird so that the data can be used for more wide sweeping conservation studies. Our data is available to anybody who wants to view it on our website, but I do feel like that's not happening all that much, so we want to get our data ready and up on eBird. Now, the data that we all fill out on the data forms asks for a little more information than you would on an eBird checklist. So we are going to lose some level of detail as we move it into eBird, which is why we're still going to maintain our own Arizona IBA database so that the level of detail that we're all collecting is preserved. And the idea of getting it on eBird is, even though we lose some of that detail, it makes that data more available for folks to do large-term studies, and then our data can then contribute to some of these big sweeping migration studies and these big studies that eBird does with data. So thank you so much for helping the Arizona IBA program. Any route you do is most likely where we're planning on putting an IBA, or even more likely monitoring an existing IBA. And this is very important work, so thank you so much, and thank you for your support of the Arizona Important Bird Areas program.